The smell of grilled meat always makes me uneasy. Maybe because it reminds me of the battlefield, of smoke and burnt steel. Or maybe because in my family, every celebration hides a little bit of cruelty behind the smell of something burning. When I stepped through the gate of my father's house that afternoon, the first thing I noticed was how nothing had changed. Not the perfectly trimmed lawn, not the white columns pretending to hold up the world, not even the flag fluttering like a performance of patriotism. The same place where my mother staged every holiday, where we smiled until our faces hurt. They told me it was a small family barbecue, just close relatives. But as I looked around the backyard, I saw 20 faces. Most of them from my father's circle, men who had worked with him during his Defense Department years, now retired, rich, and proud of being loyal to the system that fed them. I had been gone for 18 months. Therapy, medication, evaluation. A long parade of sterile rooms and tired doctors who tried to convince me I was still whole. I came back because my sister Rachel had called. Her voice had sounded light, cheerful, like she wanted peace. "It's time we all got together again," she'd said. But the moment I saw her smiling in a white dress, standing next to my father, I realized she hadn't called me to reconnect. She called me to complete the picture. My mother, Alina, spotted me from the porch. She didn't wave, but she tilted her head with that practiced elegance that said, "Behave yourself." I nodded back because that was our language, politeness instead of honesty. Arthur McDaniel was at the grill, his sleeves rolled, his watch glinting like a badge of authority. "Well, look who decided to rejoin civilization," he said when he noticed me. The crowd chuckled. "Good to see you too, Dad," I replied, forcing my tone steady. He handed me a beer. "To Rachel," he said, raising his glass. "The first McDaniel to make it into the agency, the pride of this family." Everyone clapped. Rachel blushed and leaned into him. I didn't clap. Arthur's eyes flicked to me. "Don't be shy, Lena. You've got your sister to thank. Maybe she'll show you how to use your discipline for something productive." The laughter came again, polite, synchronized. It wasn't the sound of humor, it was obedience. I excused myself, moved toward the garden where the air felt less staged. The sound of the grill and clinking glasses faded into the rustle of leaves. I thought about leaving, just walking out before the first toast ended. But then I saw it, Rachel's purse lying open on the table by the patio door. Something white peeked from it, a manila envelope with government markings. My instincts kicked in before my manners. I reached for it, slid out the document. Federal Security Clearance Application Sponsor Section. My name was printed in bold letters, Lena R. McDaniel. For a second, I didn't breathe. Then I read the next line, Sponsor Relationship, Sibling. It felt like a hand had reached into my chest and twisted something sharp. Rachel appeared behind me, her face pale. "Lena, that's just a formality," I finished for her, my voice low. My father's voice cut across the lawn. "What's going on?" "She's just confused," Rachel said quickly, reaching for the paper. Arthur walked closer, wiping his hands on a towel. "What's that?" "It's her clearance form," I said, holding it up. "She used my name." Arthur's jaw tightened. He didn't even look at the form. So it's illegal." He chuckled, a sound that didn't reach his eyes. "You always were dramatic. You think the government cares who signs what? It's family." "Family doesn't use each other's identities," I said. He leaned in, close enough that I could smell the bourbon on his breath. "Family does whatever it takes to stay relevant." The words hit like shrapnel. I turned to Rachel. "You could have asked me." She looked small, almost childlike. "I didn't think you'd mind. You're not using it anymore." There it was, the quiet cruelty that always lived between us. She said it softly, but it carried a lifetime of judgment, that I was broken, retired, a veteran with scars no one wanted to see. I handed her the envelope. "You can keep it," I said. "You've already taken what you needed." Then I walked past them, down the driveway, not looking back. Behind me, someone turned up the music. The laughter started again. The smell of smoke followed me out of the yard like a ghost. I drove without music. The road out of my parents' neighborhood felt longer than I remembered, as if someone had added extra turns while I was gone. The sky was still bright, a steady summer blue, but something inside me had already gone dark. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles paled, then loosened my hands and let them rest again. Breathe in, breathe out. It was a simple order, and still it felt like work. My apartment in Arlington sat above a dry cleaner and a bakery that closed too early. I liked it because no one stayed around at night. The hallway lights buzzed. My door stuck as usual. When I stepped inside, the air conditioner startled itself awake and the room gave a tired rattle. I did not turn on the overhead light. I let the glow from the street come through the blinds and stripe the walls in tired gold. I set my keys on the counter and stared at the empty sink, at the note I had left for myself 3 days ago that said buy coffee, and at the manila envelope Rachel had pressed against my ribs when I walked away. I had taken it because it was the only thing I could take from that house that belonged to me. I put it on the table and did not touch it for a long minute. It looked harmless the way dangerous things often do. I poured water, drank, poured again. The second glass trembled a little, and I pretended not to see it. I took off my shoes. I thought about the grill and my father calling strangers to their feet to toast a career my sister had not even started. I thought about how no one raised a glass when I left for deployment. Not once. Not even the day I came back with a medal I did not want. The apartment had the smell of old laundry and cold metal. I opened the window, then closed it again when the traffic sound felt like someone shaking coins in a jar. I sat at the table and opened the envelope. The form was clean and official and already half complete. My name stood there in black letters as if it had always been meant to live on that page. Sponsor relationship. Sibling, prior federal service. Yes, history of clearance. Yes. The section for consent was empty. It waited like a mouth. The room tilted a little. I pressed my fingers to my temples until the tilt steadied. I wanted to be angry, but what I felt first was tired. Tired in the bones, the kind of tired that lives under the skin and pretends to be calm. I took out my phone and typed search terms I had never typed before. Security sponsor misuse. Clearance fraud sibling. Criminal liability for silence. The results came fast and ugly. Words like criminal statute and identity abuse and mandatory report. It was not simply immoral. It was a crime with my name printed across the top line. I closed my eyes and told myself to count to 10. On 3, I remembered the texture of field dust on my lips. On 4, I remembered the inside of a helicopter. On 5, I remembered the wait in a triage tent when the air smelled like iron and burned plastic. I had survived bigger rooms than this and heavier kinds of silence. I opened my eyes on 6 and the table was still there and the form was still there and my name had not moved. I went to the bedroom and pulled out a storage bin that I had promised myself I would not open again. I opened it anyway. Inside were 2 old drives, a canvas notebook with my initials, a stack of printed rosters, a ribbon I had never framed, and a hospital bracelet. I held the bracelet for a breath, then put it back and took the drives. The laptop hummed awake like a shy animal. The first drive did not mount. The second one did. It opened a directory of dates that felt like someone else's life. I clicked on a folder named Logs and another called Med. I was not looking for medicine and I was not looking for memories, but they came anyway. Digital aftershocks. Photographs of sand and sky. A line of code I had written during a night shift to automate a report. A screenshot of coordinates. My own face caught in a reflection, thinner, harder eyes that did not blink enough. I pushed past it and opened a folder called Admin. There were PDFs I did not recognize, financial forms, internal memos, a draft proposal for a grant that never happened. My name appeared again and again, sometimes as signatory, sometimes embedded in metadata. When I clicked on properties and then on last modified, I saw dates that matched holidays and birthdays: Thanksgiving, New Year, Easter brunch. I pictured myself at the kitchen table nodding while someone handed me a pen. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. The photo preview showed the backyard from earlier, Rachel in the center, smiling at someone outside the frame. The caption read, "She is going to be great." It was from one of my father's friends. He had added me to a group thread during dinner. I muted it and deleted the photo. I did not delete the feeling that followed. A small tug, like a fish hook behind my sternum. The clock on my stove flicked to 10:30. I told myself to sleep. Instead, I sat on the floor and leaned my back against the bed. The quiet settled. I listened to the pipes. I thought about Rachel as a child, her hand slipping into mine when we crossed streets. She used to copy my handwriting for fun. She wanted our names to look the same. I had thought it was sweet. I had not imagined I would one day see my signature in places I had never been. I wrote a name in my notes app. Dahlia Grant. The last person who had spoken to me like I was not broken. She had sat with me during an inquiry that could have ruined me and told me to tell the truth to the inch, not the mile. That was how she said it, and I had believed her then. I still did. I stared at her name until my thumb decided to press call. She answered on the second ring, the same voice. Clear, low, tired in a trustworthy way. I told her what I had found. She asked only the right questions. Do you have copies? Did you sign anything? When? Who witnessed it? When I reached the part about the application for my sister, the room felt smaller. Dahlia listened to the end and then spoke without raising her voice. Lena, if your consent is not documented and your name appears on active security forms, you cannot ignore it. If you stay quiet, you become part of the violation. I know you do not want that. You did not want that on the field. You do not want it here. I said I understood. I did, but understanding and acceptance do not arrive in the same car. She told me to back up everything and not to confront anyone tonight. She would come in the morning. She would bring a recorder and a blank folder and a calm I could borrow. We ended the call with the kind of goodbye that means see you in the fight. I washed my face. I brushed my teeth. I stared at my reflection and tried not to hate it for how tired it looked. A small scar near my eyebrow caught the light. I touched it. It had healed without my permission. On the table, the envelope waited. I slid the application back inside and sealed it with a piece of tape. I wrote my own name across the flap because I needed to see it claimed by me at least once tonight. Then I took a pen and wrote a single sentence on a sticky note and pressed it beside the envelope where I could not miss it in the morning. Report, or you are part of it. The lights from the street moved along the wall like slow water. I lay down on the couch because the bed felt too far away. I pulled the blanket over my shoulders and listened to a siren rise and fall somewhere 3 blocks over. My eyes closed. A fragment of memory arrived uninvited. My mother at the kitchen table, her fingers resting on a neat stack of paper, her voice soft enough to pass as love. Sign this, darling. It is just a tax form. I woke an hour later with the taste of dust in my mouth. The room was quiet. The note still sat on the table. My name still sat on the envelope. I told myself again, breathe in, breathe out, morning is coming, bring the truth with it. Morning crept in without color. I woke on the couch with my body folded in an awkward angle, the blanket twisted around my knees. The clock blinked 7:30. The world outside the window was a thin mist. I stayed still, listening to the hum of the city as it tried to begin another day. The envelope was still on the table where I had left it. The note, too. Report, or you are part of it. The handwriting looked like someone else. I made coffee strong enough to hurt. The first sip burned, but at least it felt like something real. My phone buzzed twice, unknown number again, this time just a link to an article about Rachel's potential future in national service. I didn't open it. I didn't need another reminder of how fast lies travel when they're well-dressed. At 9, the buzzer rang. I already knew who it was. Dahlia never called before arriving. She was the kind of person who believed in knocking on trouble's door rather than waiting for it to knock first. She stood in the hallway wearing a gray suit, eyes steady, hair tied back. She looked like purpose wrapped in calm. Still early, I said. You weren't going to sleep anyway, she replied and stepped inside. We sat at the table. She placed a recorder, a small folder, and a legal pad between us. The air smelled faintly of her perfume and the bitter roast of my coffee. Tell me everything, she said. I started with the barbecue. The crowd, the toast, the form. My voice stayed even until I reached the part where Arthur called me useful. Something in me tightened, but I kept going. I told her about the drives, the forms, the signature that wasn't mine. When I mentioned my mother's face in that flash of memory, Dahlia wrote something quickly but didn't interrupt. When I finished, she asked only one question. Do you think your father is capable of this? Yes, she nodded as if the answer had been inevitable. And your mother? I hesitated. She doesn't get involved. Sometimes not getting involved is the involvement, she said quietly. We spent hours building the bones of a report, dates, names, file paths, any connection between Arthur's consulting work and the projects listed under my clearance. By noon, the table looked like a crime scene in miniature. When Dahlia finally leaned back, she looked both exhausted and alive. This is serious, Lena. You're sitting on federal misuse. They didn't just borrow your name, they used your authority. I stared at the papers. How long do you think it's been happening? She pointed at one of the dates. At least since 2015, probably longer. The room felt smaller. I walked to the window. Down on the street, people were walking dogs, carrying coffees, waving to buses. I wondered what it would feel like to live without secrets. Dahlia's voice followed me. I can file the preliminary report under whistleblower protection. It'll flag the clearance misuse and start an internal audit. You'll need to testify if it escalates. Against my own family, I said. Against the people who used you, she corrected. That word, used, sat heavy between us. When she left, the apartment seemed too quiet again. The envelope was gone now, sealed inside her folder on its way to becoming evidence. I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. I cleaned the table, stacked the cups, and realized my hands were shaking. I told myself it was the caffeine. I knew it was. I spent the afternoon hunting my own shadow. The drives sat like mute witnesses on the table, one plugged into the laptop, the other waiting its turn. The screen cast a cool light over the apartment. It felt like being in a tent again, the world narrowed to a circle of glow and tasks that demanded focus. I let the rest of the room recede and sank into the directories that still carried my fingerprints. I started a simple list on a blank document. Date, file name, location, who touched it last. The first dozen entries painted a story I did not want to read. E-signatures for equipment audits, travel authorizations, internal memos about field readiness. Most of them were mine and legitimate. Then a seam opened. The file names looked right, but the metadata stung. Modified by external user, submitted from local address, routed through Arthur McDaniel Consulting. A part of me whispered that this could still be a misunderstanding. The rest of me knew better. A folder named Archive held a subfolder called Sponsors. I clicked through, expecting more of the same. In it, I found a scan of a federal form dated 5 years earlier than Rachel's application. The top line named a sponsor, a McDaniel, not a first name, just the initial and the last name, like a shadow moving behind a curtain. I zoomed into the signature. The lines curved with a gentleness I recognized in my own hand. I felt it before I was willing to admit it. This was not my father's signature. It was shaped like mine. Memory rose all at once. Winter light on a kitchen table. A mug leaving a pale ring on a printed form. My mother's voice, soft and tidy, moving through the house like warm air. The day had been ordinary. I was home for 2 nights between assignments. She had made soup. She had placed papers under my hand and said they were routine. Her fingers rested on the page in a way that said it would make her happy if I signed. I had been too tired to read the clauses. I had been too grateful for soup and quiet. The laptop fan whirred. I steadied my breath and took screenshots of everything. I saved copies to a fresh drive, labeled the folder with the kind of clarity that would make sense to a stranger. If this ever left my hands, I wanted the next person to see what I saw. The phone rang, unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, a message came through. It was Rachel. Her voice was bright around the edges and raw in the middle. I heard you talk to Dahlia. Can we please not turn this into a war? Dad said he will handle it. He said we just need to file a confirmation from you and it will be fine. I never meant to hurt you. I only wanted to move forward. You told me once that moving forward is the only way we survive. She had a talent for using my own words like rope. I did not reply. I saved the voicemail to a separate folder called Contact. Then I opened the second drive. This one was messier, which made it more honest. Field notes. Scans of my green notebook. A video clip of a briefing room where a projector flickered and a man coughed like a car trying to start. Buried 3 levels down were spreadsheets that did not belong in a field drive. They listed numbers and programs and contact codes that linked to civilian contractors. Every few lines my clearance tag appeared as a justification. The spreadsheet author had a local username that matched the initials of a junior accountant I remembered from my father's office. M.P. Meera Patel. Young, careful, always with a black notebook. I felt something like anger finally arrive. It did not come as heat, it came as frost. My fingers steadied, my eyes sharpened. I was not a daughter at a family table anymore. I was a witness with a pen. I cross-referenced file hashes and pulled a small map together. Dates, servers, submission timestamps, approvals. I saw patterns like footprints in snow. There was a cluster in late November 5 years back, another in February the year Rachel applied. Nighttime submissions, non-work hours. Someone who believed that darkness could swallow paper. In the middle of this, another memory surfaced. My mother's neat cursive on a grocery list. Her habit of writing cards by hand for every holiday, every birthday, even for my commander once when he sent flowers to the house. The way she could turn her script into any version you needed, formal, friendly, official, motherly. I had loved her elegant letters as a child. I had traced them on napkins when I was 8 and believed that writing beautifully made everything true. I opened the scanned sponsor form again and laid it side by side with a birthday card she had written for me during my first deployment. The capital letters matched in their slant. The curl on the M reached a little too far before it settled. A small flourish, almost like a signature waving to itself. My name looked back at me and around it my mother's shape. I knew what this meant. I did not know what to do with that knowledge yet. The buzzer startled me. I flinched, then heard Dahlia's voice through the speaker. I let her in. She carried a lighter bag this time and a face that said she had been making calls. I found a sponsor form with a McDaniel on it, I said as she stepped in. The signature is not my father's. She watched me for a breath. Then she sat without taking off her jacket. Show me. I laid the forms out like a confession and walked her through the steps. The way the system logged the submission, the way the signature bent, the dates that lined up with holidays, she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she took a slow breath. Lena, this is the foreshadow we did not want but needed to see. It means your father may not be the origin. It does not absolve him. It changes the geometry. I stared at the screen. Geometry was a kind word. This felt like a map that someone had been redrawing under my feet for years. Dahlia reached into her folder and slid a thin stack of printouts toward me. I called an internal contact, she said. I asked for anonymized routing data for 3 suspicious filing dates. We have packet traces that point to your father's office server, and one that points to a residential IP on your street from 5 winters ago. My mouth went dry. My building. My street. My mother had visited that winter. She had brought soup. She had said I looked tired. She had washed my dishes and left a small vase of flowers beside the sink. I remembered a form that night. I remembered signing something without reading because the soup was still warm and the house finally quiet. Dahlia did not speak. I realized then that she already understood what I was trying to convince myself not to understand. I nodded once, which was the only admission I could afford. We will need a statement from the accountant, she said. Mira Patel, she is likely to be the hinge. If she kept anything, it will corroborate the timeline. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my father, no voicemail. A text appeared seconds later. Stop letting outsiders into family matters. You are not thinking clearly. Bring the envelope back. We will fix this at home. There was a time those words would have wrapped around my ribs and squeezed. Now they slid off like water. I handed the phone to Dahlia. She read it, took a picture for the file, and placed it face down. You will not go to the house, she said. If they want a conversation, they can request a formal one. We file preliminary tonight. Copies secured in 3 places. You sleep. In the morning, we go find Mira. I believed her because I needed to. Together, we labeled the digital set, pushed backups to 2 encrypted vaults, and wrote a short cover letter for the internal report. Dahlia handled the submission. Her voice shifted into a kind of stillness I recognized, the voice of someone doing hard things for the 10th time and deciding to do them well again. When she left, the apartment did not feel empty. It felt orderly, the kind of order that makes fear behave. I washed my cup. I wiped the table. I took the sticky note down and placed it inside the folder as if it belonged among the official pages. Night stretched itself over the window. I stood without turning on the lights and watched the street. A woman walked her dog, a man carried a bag of oranges, a child ran in loose shoes, tripping once and laughing at the sidewalk. The world continued. I was a person in a room gathering evidence that my own life had been used like a tool. The fact felt both too large and strangely simple. Before bed, I opened the scan of the sponsor form one more time and traced the shape of the M with my eyes. My mother had always said that silence was a form of grace. She meant that we keep the peace by not naming the wound. I had believed her the way children believe whatever lets them sleep. Grace is not silence. Grace is the truth spoken gently. I said it out loud to the empty room as if the walls needed to hear another language. I powered down the laptop. I checked the lock twice. I lay in the dark and let the ceiling find me. A siren passed in the distance, then faded. Somewhere in the building, a pipe clicked. I pictured a quiet office with low light, a young accountant with a black notebook, and my name moving across the screen as if it belonged to anyone who could reach it. Tomorrow, I would knock on her door. Tomorrow, I would ask for the peace I could not find by myself. For now, I let the fact settle in the bed beside me. The origin of this was not the man who shouted. It might be the woman who never did. Morning again, gray and wet, a color that matched the inside of my chest. I dressed without looking in the mirror and met Dahlia at the corner cafe. She had already ordered black coffee for both of us. She never asked how I liked it, and she was always right. We didn't talk until the second sip. Mira Patel, she said, opening a small notebook. She left your father's firm last year, moved across the river, runs bookkeeping for a contractor. I got an address. I nodded. Does she know we're coming? She knows someone needs to ask about old files. She doesn't know who. We walked there together. The rain had thinned to mist, soft enough to feel like breath on the skin. The office sat above a hardware store, 2 rooms with paper blinds. Mira was younger than I remembered, maybe because back then I'd been half blind from exhaustion. She blinked when she saw me. Lena, I thought you left the country. Almost, I said. Can we talk? Her eyes moved to Dahlia, read the calm in her stance, and decided honesty might be cheaper than avoidance. She led us into the back office. There was a hum from an overworked heater and the smell of burnt dust. "I kept a copy of everything," she said before I asked. "When they shut my system access, I couldn't make sense of the deletions. Your name showed up too many times." She handed me a flash drive sealed in plastic. I didn't open it after I left. I didn't want to know. We plugged it into my laptop right there on her desk. Folders blossomed on the screen: reports, payment receipts, and a series of scanned correspondence chains. Most were addressed between Arthur's office and something labeled EMD Finance. EMD, my mother's initials. Dahlia's pen paused midair. "These were sent from a private line." Mira nodded. "Your mother's email, yes. She was the only one who could approve family-link sponsorships for the trial security model. She told me it was just to speed clearance background checks. She even sent handwritten approval letters, said it was her daughter's handwriting, so it looked authentic for inter-department verification." The words scraped like metal. Dahlia asked for copies, and Mira printed 2 summaries while I sat frozen, trying to line up the voices in my head: the father who believed in power, the sister who borrowed names, and the mother who signed with mine. Outside, the air smelled of wet concrete. Dahlia folded the papers into her coat. "This confirms the network. But we still need motive." "Motive?" I said. "Survival, pride, maybe habit." "Maybe," she said, "but motive turns a scandal into a crime. We follow the money next." Back in my apartment, I laid everything out on the floor. The pattern began to appear. Each forged clearance corresponded to a contract Arthur's company had landed, classified bids that required an insider sponsor. The sponsor was always me. The approvals traced to Aliner's old treasury credentials. I wrote her name on a page and stared at it until the letters blurred. When I finally looked up, the room had gone dark except for the laptop glow. I started recording a voice memo, Dahlia's idea, a verbal log for the record. "My name is Lena McDaniel. I believe my personal security credentials were used without consent in multiple federal applications. The individuals involved include Arthur McDaniel and possibly Aliner McDaniel." Saying my mother's name felt like swallowing glass. The recorder blinked red, patient, waiting for more. I stopped it and saved the file. I didn't notice the text until an hour later. A new number, but the tone was familiar. "Stop digging, Lena. You don't understand the full picture. Let us handle it quietly." No signature, no greeting, but the phrasing, "handle it quietly," was pure Aliner. I stared at the screen until the letters seemed to fade into the glow. Then I saved a screenshot and forwarded it to Dahlia with a single line: "She knows." Her reply came quick: "Then she's nervous." "Good, don't answer her." I shut off the lights and sat in the dark. The hum of the refrigerator sounded like breathing. For the first time, fear and clarity lived in the same room. Tomorrow we would follow the bank trails. Tomorrow I might have to look my mother in the eyes and ask whether she had ever loved me separate from my usefulness. For now, I whispered into the quiet, "Grace isn't silence." The words hung there like a promise and a warning. Morning arrived slow and gray. I woke before my alarm, the apartment too quiet. My body ached in ways that had nothing to do with sleep. The drives were still there, waiting. I sat at the table with the first cup of coffee and pulled the folders closer. Every line of code, every scan form, every signature told a story that was mine but wasn't. I felt like a ghost in my own life. I called Dahlia while flipping through the first folder. "I want to trace every instance of my clearance," I said. "Every contract, every sponsor note, from the beginning." She didn't hesitate. "Start with Arthur's archives. I can cross-check with internal servers." Hours passed in silence except for typing and the occasional hum of the laptop fan. My eyes burned, but I kept going. I tracked dates, matched signatures, and cross-referenced IP addresses. Slowly, a pattern emerged. A network of activity spanning years. Every time a project was approved under my name, there was a submission coming from my father's office, but also from an older, almost forgotten email account belonging to my mother. I froze. My mother's initials were on some of these submissions. Not in her own name, not formal, but hidden inside the chain, almost invisible. I scrolled back to one of the oldest files. A sponsor request dated 5 years ago. Zooming in on the signature, my stomach clenched. I could not deny the curl of the M, the faint tilt, my handwriting. And yet it wasn't mine. I remembered that day clearly now. My mother's hands resting on a stack of papers. "Sign this, darling, it's just paperwork," she said. I had obeyed without reading. I thought it harmless. I was wrong. Dahlia arrived mid-afternoon. She had brought her laptop, a legal pad, and the patience to walk through every file with me. "We need to map it," she said. "All of it. Date, source, signature, who signed first. Follow the chain to the origin." We worked. Hours bled into each other. I started to see the truth of my life in a new light. The chain of fraud wasn't just my father's doing. My mother had set the first domino in motion, quietly without fanfare. She had borrowed my identity to open doors that were never meant for me. I always thought Dad was the problem, I said. It's her. Origin doesn't always mean intent, Dahlia said gently. She started it, yes, but we need proof. She could claim she was helping. That might not hold up legally, but it matters for the story. We built timelines, compared document hashes, and verified digital footprints. Each step was methodical, deliberate, like tracing a river back to its source. The river was mine, but the source was hidden beneath someone else's hands. By evening, we had the first full map. Clearances under my name, contracts approved, emails, scanned signatures, all traced to either my father's office or my mother's old credentials. The realization hit me like ice. My family had used me literally as a tool to move power, money, and influence. Dahlia leaned back, exhausted. Tomorrow, we confront Mira. She knows everything. She has the flash drive. I nodded. I need to see it. I need to know the scope. She didn't ask if I was ready. She didn't need to. We both knew readiness was a luxury I hadn't earned yet. When she left, I sat in the dark and reviewed everything again. The shape of the letters, the dates, the approvals. My mother's influence had been invisible, almost sacred in its silence. She had done this without ever raising her voice, without threatening anyone, without a single show of force. And yet her fingerprints were on every violation, the spark that lit the fire of deception. I whispered into the quiet apartment, "Grace isn't silence. Grace is truth even if it hurts." I saved the last batch of screenshots, locked the drives in a cabinet, and finally let myself sit back. Outside, the city hummed with life. Children's voices, the distant horn of a car, footsteps on wet pavement. None of them knew my name had been borrowed, stolen, and twisted. But tomorrow, that would change. Tomorrow, I would trace the river to its source, and I would find the woman who first used my identity to bend the world without me knowing. This time, she would not be silent. The next morning, the city smelled of wet asphalt and diesel, the kind of gray that seeps into your lungs and your thoughts at the same time. I carried my laptop, the drives in a small satchel, and the memory of my mother's handwriting curling in the back of my skull. Dahlia and I met at a small diner halfway between Arlington and the accountant's office. She had her notebook open, coffee steaming, a pen tapping lightly against the table. Her eyes scanned me before she spoke. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said. "I didn't," I admitted. I went over the files again, every signature, every IP, every approval. "Mom, she's at the start of this chain." Her hand paused mid-tap. "So the origin isn't your father?" "No, he extended it, but the first move, the domino, was hers. She borrowed my name to manipulate approvals, make contracts go through, make him look like a genius. It's brilliant and terrifying at the same time." Dahlia nodded slowly. "We'll need Mira, she's our hinge." We drove in silence after that, the road slick from an overnight drizzle. Rain slid across the windshield, distorting the city into a watercolor blur. I thought about Rachel and how small she must have felt in all this, and I thought about my father, towering and unaware that the pieces of his empire had been built on the letters of my own hand. The building where Mira worked smelled like old paper and printer ink. She looked up from her desk when we arrived. Years had softened her, but there was still a sharpness in her eyes, the kind that notices everything. "I need your help," I said. "Everything you have from your time with Arthur McDaniel Consulting. Every file, every record, every copy of anything that used my clearance." She hesitated, then handed me a small flash drive, sealed. "I didn't touch it after leaving the firm," she said. "I couldn't. I didn't want to know. I don't want trouble." "I don't either," I said. "I just need the truth." Back in my apartment, I plugged the flash drive in. Folders blossomed across the screen. Spreadsheets, PDF forms, scan letters, email chains. Most of them linked to contracts I had no idea existed. Each one traced back to either my father's office or my mother's old credentials. I felt a coldness settle into my chest. The web of influence, the network of manipulation, the way my name had been used like a tool, it all became visible, tangible. Dahlia came over and watched the screen. "We can map it," she said. "Dates, submissions, who signed first and who handled what. We need the story, the complete picture, from start to finish." I leaned back in my chair. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Start with the earliest files," I said. "Trace every clearance, every approval, every signed document." We worked for hours, building a timeline. Early 2015, the first forged submission using my name. Later that year, another, then another, each building on the last. My mother's initials appeared in the metadata, her residential IP logged on a few occasions, dates that coincided with family dinners or visits. "You're saying she did this while keeping the appearance of doing nothing," Dahlia said. "Yes," I said. "She signed, she rooted, she let everyone else take the credit." "Then the next step," she said. "Money, paper trail, contracts, follow the benefits." We began linking contracts approved under my name to bank records. Every project awarded to Arthur's firm, every subcontract, traced through federal funding, connected by the invisible thread of my clearance. I saw my identity move across accounts, across approvals, across years. Dahlia stopped at one entry. "Look at this timestamp. Late night 5 years ago, residential IP, that's your mother's house." I stared at the screen, my mind flipping through memories. The soup she brought when I returned from the field. The quiet evenings at the kitchen table. The forms she had pressed into my hand. I realized that the first spark, the first act of manipulation, had been deliberate, invisible, and masterful. I pressed record on the voice memo. "My name is Lena McDaniel," I said, letting the words fill the room. "I have discovered unauthorized use of my federal security clearance over multiple years. The origin appears to be Alina McDaniel, my mother. The data confirms involvement of Arthur McDaniel and further corroborates the misappropriation of my identity." I stopped and listened to my own voice. Calm, measured, but underneath it all, a storm. Dahlia leaned back, exhausted. "Tomorrow we meet with the bank, the contractor accounts. We trace the money, we find the full path. Then we will have the story." I nodded. "Then we will know the full scale. Then we can act." The sun had begun to set, the room glowing amber. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, reflecting in puddles. Somewhere a child laughed. Somewhere a dog barked. And I realized that for the first time in years, I was no longer just a passive witness to my own story. I was the one holding the pen. Tomorrow, the investigation would start in earnest. And this time, no one would be able to manipulate the narrative without my knowing. The next morning, the sky was low and heavy, the kind of gray that pressed down on your shoulders even before you left the house. Dahlia and I had decided to follow the money first. Bank transfers, invoices, contracts, every trail pointing back to Arthur McDaniel Consulting and indirectly to my name. I carried the flash drives carefully, almost reverently. They held the skeletons of my life, the things I had never agreed to, never authorized. And yet here they were, moving across servers, appearing in audits and approvals, silently claiming authority I didn't give. We started at the bank, a small branch that handled several of the contractor accounts. Dahlia explained the situation in a clipped, professional tone. "We're performing an audit, federal clearance misuse. We need transaction logs tied to McDaniel Consulting between 2015 and 2023. The teller, young, polite, slightly overwhelmed, fetched printouts from a back room. She brought the stacks and left us to it. I spread the papers across the table in a neat grid, tracing numbers, timestamps, account numbers. Each transaction was a thread, pulling us closer to understanding the scope. Most payments went directly to contractor firms, some to Arthur's company accounts, and several had me listed as the authorized signatory, though I had never touched the documents. Dahlia pointed to one line. "Look at this date, December 2015. That matches the earliest forged clearance you found. Amount, $250,000. Purpose, emergency project fund. Routed through what looks like a residential IP." I froze. My mother's house 5 years ago, the same IP that had appeared in the metadata. That had been the first act, invisible, perfect. She had signed in my name, moved the funds, ensured Arthur's project looked legitimate. My fingers traced the numbers. The magnitude hit me. My name had enabled hundreds of thousands of dollars to flow where it shouldn't, and everyone assumed my silence meant consent. "Do you think Rachel knows?" I asked. Dahlia shook her head. "She might, but if she does, she's just a pawn at this point." We moved through the rest of the files systematically. Each transaction revealed the hierarchy. Mother sets the initial approval using my identity, father expands the projects under his firm, contractors reap the benefits, and Rachel gets the accolades of being part of the family's legacy of service. I sat back and took a deep breath. So they've been building a fortune, a reputation, and a career on my back. "Yes," Dahlia said quietly. "And now you have the map." By evening, I was exhausted. I had traced dozens of payments, dozens of approvals, dozens of moments where my signature, my very identity, was used as a tool. But the most troubling was realizing just how invisible my mother had been throughout it all. She had started it quietly, deliberately. Arthur had escalated it, but the first act of manipulation was hers. I recorded another voice memo. Today we traced financial transactions corresponding with unauthorized use of my clearance. The earliest evidence originates from a residential IP traced to a Leaner McDaniel, corroborating metadata found on multiple submission files. Arthur McDaniel and associated contractors benefited directly. Further investigation will follow. I stopped the recording and listened to the silence afterward. My apartment felt different now. The knowledge had weight, and with weight came responsibility. I could no longer pretend to be a bystander. Later that night, Rachel called. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Lena, I heard what's going on. Please, can we not make this worse?" I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "You're part of this because of them, not because of me. I don't hold anything against you yet, but I will if you try to lie." She sighed. I didn't know, I didn't see it." "I know," I said, "but seeing isn't enough anymore. We're past that." I hung up and sat in the dark, the apartment silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Outside, a siren passed, a reminder that the world continued as it always had, unaware of the threads being untangled inside my life. Tomorrow we would meet with more witnesses. I would confront Mira further. We would map every transaction, every approval, every forged signature. And eventually, someone would have to answer for this. For the first time in years, I felt ready to write my own chapter. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose heavier than the gray light coming through the blinds. I dressed quickly, slipping into jeans and a jacket that had pockets big enough to hide my phone, recorder, and the flash drive from Mira. The city smelled like rain on asphalt again, the kind of smell that sharpens the senses, makes you alert, almost predatory. Dahlia and I decided it was time to test the waters, to see how far the family would push before realizing that I was no longer their passive witness. First stop, Rachel. I didn't call, I didn't text. I went to the small apartment she rented not far from downtown. She opened the door before I could knock properly. Her face was bright with surprise that quickly faded into guardedness. "Lena, I didn't expect you," she said. "I need to talk," I said. She stepped aside and I entered. The apartment smelled faintly of baked bread, soft and domestic. I scanned the room. Nothing here suggested manipulation, just innocence, or perhaps ignorance. We sat at the small kitchen table. I placed my bag on the floor, leaned slightly forward. "Do you know what's been done with my name?" I asked. Rachel looked down, fiddling with her fingers. "I know about the clearance forms, I didn't understand." "I thought Dad handled everything, I didn't," I interrupted gently, not because I wanted to hurt, but because I needed her to understand. "You're part of this because you let them use it. You signed off on the forms knowing they bore my name. You may not have started it, but your silence let it continue." Her eyes widened. "I didn't want to hurt you." "Intent doesn't matter here," I said. "The law sees actions, not feelings, and your actions put you in the middle." I left without further explanation. I needed her to feel the weight, to let it settle. People respond to consequences before understanding, and I needed Rachel to comprehend the first layer. Afterward, Dahlia and I returned to my apartment to review the Mira files again. This time, we traced the connections between the contracts, the internal memos, and the unauthorized clearances in a more methodical way. Patterns became clearer. Each unauthorized action had a timestamp, an IP address, a signed form. Every chain pointed back to either my father or the shadow of my mother. Dahlia leaned back in her chair and rubbed her temples. "Your father's defense will be simple. He'll claim ignorance of the origin, claim he trusted systems, delegated authority, and followed protocol. But you have the entire digital trail now." I nodded, looking at the spreadsheet. The evidence was cold, irrefutable, and overwhelming. Every transaction, every approval, every forged signature was mapped. My mother's initials hovered at the origin. My father's at the escalation. Rachel's participation was incidental but undeniable. It occurred to me that confrontation wasn't about raising voices. It was about creating a landscape where truth could no longer hide. And that meant using the tools they had ignored: documentation, dates, digital proof, and patient, unwavering observation. Around noon, I received a text from Arthur. "Stop meddling. You don't understand the full picture. Leave this to us." I didn't respond. I forwarded it to Dahlia. She smiled faintly. "He's panicking. Good, let him." In the late afternoon, I traced more of the bank transfers. Each transaction that had initially seemed incidental now formed a chain of dependencies. One contract led to another. Unauthorized clearances flowed into real money, into real projects. The pattern was devastatingly elegant. It wasn't just negligence. It was careful orchestration. And my name was the key that made it possible. I paused, closing my eyes. This had been my life, a passive existence, my identity borrowed, manipulated, and exploited. And now, for the first time, I held the lens through which I could observe every move, every flaw, every concealment. Dahlia broke the silence. We prepare the preliminary report tonight. Tomorrow, we contact the authorities. Your name is the evidence, but also the shield. We move carefully, step by step. I looked at the flash drives and the papers scattered across the table. I imagined Arthur discovering that his own daughter had taken command of the narrative. I imagined Rachel realizing she could no longer hide behind familial loyalty. And I imagined my mother, quiet and methodical, learning that her first act of manipulation would be traced to the light of day. The day ended with me standing at the window, watching the city darken. Streetlights reflected in puddles, car headlights glimmered, and somewhere, faint and distant, someone laughed. I realized for the first time in years that I was no longer a shadow in my own life. I was present, observing, judging, preparing. Tomorrow, the confrontation would become unavoidable, and I was ready. The next morning, I didn't go through the front door. I used the side entrance, the one no one ever noticed, the one that gave me control over my approach. Arthur's mansion looked like a fortress under the summer sun, white columns glowing in false grandeur. The garden smelled faintly of lavender and gasoline, a mix only a McDaniel household could create. I walked straight to the study. He was there, seated behind a desk stacked with papers, letters, and an open laptop. The smell of bourbon lingered faintly in the air. He looked up, surprised but not entirely. "Lena," he said, "to what do I owe this visit?" "I need answers," I said. I left my bag by the door. Inside, the flash drives and spreadsheets were carefully organized, a physical manifestation of my own control over the chaos. Arthur leaned back. "About what? Rachel's clearance?" "Yes, about my name." I placed the folder with the mapped files in front of him. "You've been using it for years. You mother Rachel, everyone but me." His smile was tight, strained. "You exaggerate, it's just paperwork, you know how the system works." I opened the first spreadsheet, showing him timestamps, approvals, and the IP addresses. "These are not exaggerations. Every approval, every contract, every clearance you claimed was necessary traced back to me. My name, my identity, used without consent. Even Mother's earliest forms match my handwriting. Do you understand what this means?" He stiffened. "You're making assumptions." I trusted the system, and Rachel, she was following direction, nothing malicious. "Malicious or not," I said, "this is fraud, identity misuse, federal violations, and now with the full chain of events I have evidence." Arthur's hands clenched into fists. "You don't understand. Your mother started this to protect the family legacy, to keep us moving forward." I shook my head. "You don't get it. Protecting the legacy does not give you permission to use my life as currency. Not then, not now. And certainly not without accountability." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You're overreacting. You've always overreacted. This isn't about justice, it's about ego." "No," I said, keeping my voice steady, "this is about truth, and I've traced it all. Every transaction, every signature, every digital footprint. The origin points to Mother. You escalated it. Rachel benefited. But I am the one who holds the record. And that means I decide how this ends." There was silence. The kind of silence that screams louder than words. He realized, finally, that I wasn't a frightened daughter or a passive participant. I was the architect of exposure, the one who could dismantle the carefully constructed empire built on my name. He leaned back, face pale. You'll ruin everything." "I'll restore what's mine," I said. "And the rest is for the law to decide." The confrontation ended without a fight, without screaming. But the tension was suffocating. I left the study, my bag over my shoulder, feeling the weight of years lift slightly, replaced by the gravity of impending action. Later, I contacted Dahlia to plan the submission of the preliminary report. We organized the evidence into timelines, financial trails, and signed statements. Every piece pointed to the unauthorized use of my clearance, my identity, and my labor. We also noted Mother's involvement as the origin point, carefully marking it as a foreshadowing twist for authorities to investigate. That night, I sat by the window, watching the city lights reflect in puddles from the afternoon rain. I thought of Rachel, of my father, of my mother, the quiet manipulator. For the first time in years, I felt the power of knowledge. I whispered to myself, "The river starts upstream. Now I see the source." The courthouse smelled like old wood and recycled tension. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I walked in, each step echoing in a way that reminded me of deployment corridors, sterile and empty, full of expectation. Dahlia was beside me, calm and ready, carrying the folder that contained the culmination of months of work. Emails, scan forms, IP logs, bank transactions, spreadsheets, and my voice memos. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick. Reporters whispered among themselves, pens scratching against paper, cameras set to capture every expression. My father, Arthur, sat at the defense table. His posture was rigid, a man who had built an empire on appearances, now caught in the framework of evidence he could not control. Rachel sat beside him, eyes wide and pleading, unaware of the true magnitude of what had been built under my name. When the judge called the session to order, Dahlia and I presented the preliminary report. I felt every eye on me as I spoke in a calm, measured voice. "My name is Lena McDaniel," I began. "This testimony concerns the unauthorized use of my federal security clearance. Documents, approvals, and financial transactions demonstrate that my identity was used without consent for multiple contracts and projects over the past 8 years." The room remained silent. I let the weight of that statement settle. I led them through the timeline, pointing to evidence of approval chains, scanned documents, and the IP addresses that trace the earliest forms back to my mother, Eleanor McDaniel. My father's escalations, my sister's involvement, all documented. Each piece was deliberate and irrefutable. Arthur tried to interject. "This is exaggerated, taken out of context." I turned to him without rising from my seat. "Context does not excuse fraud. Not when my identity is used as a tool without my knowledge or consent. You, father, escalated the misuse. Mother, as documented, initiated it. Rachel, you benefited." Gasps rose among the spectators. The reporters scribbled faster. Rachel lowered her head, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. She whispered something to her attorney, but no one heard. The first foreshadowed twist became evident in the room. The origin of the misuse was Eleanor. The public, the jury, everyone present had assumed Arthur was the primary culprit. Now the entire narrative shifted. Dahlia called Meera Patel to testify. She described the manipulation, the chain of documents, how my mother had used my name in the first instance, the perfect, quiet deception that allowed the family to claim legitimacy. Her voice was steady, factual, unable to be twisted. The tension was palpable. Arthur leaned forward, face pale. "This is impossible." "You're fabricating," but a small screen at the side flickered to life. It played a recording from my voice memo, Eleanor's old email headers, document metadata, all proof that the chain began upstream. Every signature, timestamp, and routing path confirmed the story. The room shifted. Reporters leaned forward. The jury adjusted in their seats. Everyone realized the narrative had changed. The father was not the origin. The mother had set the first domino in motion. The judge called for order. "The evidence is substantial. The court acknowledges the gravity of these findings. Further review and formal charges will proceed." Arthur's face turned a deep red. He looked at me, searching for the daughter he had underestimated. I met his gaze calmly. No words could reach through the wall of truth now. Rachel wept quietly. My mother, absent from the proceedings, had unknowingly created a ripple that would not stop at her own household. I felt the rush of relief, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the climax was only beginning. The public exposure, the media, the personal reckoning, this was just the start. The first domino had been identified, and the entire cascade was set into motion. I whispered under my breath, "The source is revealed. Now we see how far it spreads." The second day of the hearing began with a quiet tension that felt heavier than the room itself. The gallery was full. Reporters, cameras, observers, all waiting for the next move. Arthur sat stiffly, hands clasped, while Rachel avoided eye contact, shuffling papers that did nothing to change the truth. The judge called the court to order. I stood again, feeling the weight of every witness, every document, every email, every forged signature. This was more than evidence. It was the story of my life rewritten into accountability. Dahlia approached me and whispered, "We present the financial trail first. Let the numbers speak before words cloud judgment." I nodded. The screens flickered to life, showing hundreds of transactions mapped across years, approvals stacked by date, each tied to my clearance. IP addresses traced back to my father's office, but the earliest points, 5 years ago on winter nights, led to a residential IP I knew too well, my mother's house. Gasps and whispers rippled through the courtroom. The first foreshadow twist became visible to everyone. Eleanor, quiet, methodical, had initiated the misuse of my identity. My father escalated it, but the spark had always been upstream. Dahlia called Meera Patel to testify. She described how a leaner had submitted early forms in my name to open doors, then left the rest to my father to execute. Her voice was steady and precise. There was no emotion in her recital, but the truth carried the weight of a hammer. Arthur's lawyer tried to object, citing procedural misinterpretations. The judge allowed the testimony to proceed, watching Arthur closely. He leaned back, muttering under his breath, trying to reclaim control. Then the main plot twist landed. Dahlia presented the recorded emails and metadata evidence that showed my mother's direct involvement, not incidental, but deliberate. The room shifted. Everyone had assumed Arthur was the origin of the fraudulent activity. The truth changed everything. Arthur's face paled. Rachel looked up, realization crossing her features. She had been part of the chain, benefiting from the misuse, but the true architect had been invisible all along. The judge paused. This evidence suggests premeditated identity misuse originating from a household member, leading to financial and professional gain. The primary responsible party is Alina McDaniel, with Arthur McDaniel complicit and Rachel McDaniel benefiting. This court acknowledges the severity of these findings and orders further review and charges. Reporters scribbled rapidly. Cameras captured expressions of shock. The courtroom was a mix of disbelief and murmured exclamations. The narrative had shifted completely. The father was no longer the sole villain. The mother's quiet manipulation had been the invisible force that powered the family's exploitation of my name. I felt a strange clarity settle over me. For years, my identity had been borrowed, stretched, used without consent. Now it was my story to tell, my evidence to present, my truth to claim. I whispered under my breath, "This is the end of silence." Arthur slumped into his chair. His empire of control, built on my identity, was unraveling. Rachel's involvement was being questioned publicly. My mother, though absent, had triggered a reckoning she could not have foreseen. I let my gaze sweep over the courtroom. For the first time, I felt the weight of being seen, not as a daughter, not as a pawn, not as a signature, but as myself. Dahlia squeezed my shoulder briefly. "It's done for now. Let the law handle the rest. You've reclaimed your narrative." The room buzzed, a mix of shock and intrigue. I sat back, letting the moment linger. The first domino had fallen. The river of consequence would ripple outward, unstoppable. Outside, the sun was dipping low. The reflection of the light on wet streets mirrored the clarity I felt inside. My name, my life, my identity, they were mine again. And for the first time in years, I smiled. The days after the hearing felt unreal. The apartment was quiet except for the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the soft tapping of rain against the window. I didn't sleep well. My dreams were filled with numbers, signatures, and faces I had long ignored. But every morning I woke feeling a little lighter, as if the burden of a stolen identity had begun to lift. I moved my work into the cabin by the lake. Small, isolated, surrounded by pines and the quiet rustle of water against rocks. It smelled like cedar and earth, a far cry from the antiseptic scent of city apartments or the lingering aroma of my father's mansion. Here, I could breathe and think without intrusion. Dahlia called one morning. "There's a request for you to speak at the National Ethics in Security Conference," she said. "They want the first-hand perspective." I hesitated. Speaking publicly, sharing my story, it was intimidating. But I realized that silence had given them control before. Now, my voice could reclaim the narrative for everyone affected by similar misuse. The day of the conference, I walked onto the stage, bright lights washing over me, cameras rolling, the audience waiting. I spoke in the first person, not as a lawyer or investigator, but as Lena McDaniel, the woman whose name had been borrowed and abused. "Silence," I began, "does not protect you. It only allows others to define your life. My name was used without consent, my identity treated like currency, and for years I was unaware. The system, the people closest to me, even family, leveraged my existence for their gain. But truth has a way of finding its path." I saw nods, whispers, people leaning forward. I continued, explaining how identity misuse can span both personal and professional spheres, emphasizing the importance of vigilance, ethics, and self-ownership. I didn't name all the players, but the weight of my story was undeniable. Afterward, a journalist asked, "How do you feel now that your name is reclaimed?" I smiled, finally allowing myself the lightness that had been absent for so long. "For the first time," I said, "I am free. Free to be myself, not the person others needed me to be." Later that evening, I sat by the lake, the water reflecting the last streaks of twilight. I lit a small fire in the cabin's hearth and burned the stack of apology letters from Rachel. They were symbolic, remnants of attempts to repair trust after betrayal. I didn't need them anymore. I signed my name on a blank notebook page, slowly, deliberately. Lena McDaniel. No middle initial, no borrowed authority, no silent acquiescence. Just mine. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft glow across the water. The breeze stirred the pines, carrying with it the scent of earth and rain. I felt a weight lift completely from my shoulders. I whispered into the quiet night, "This is my life, my name, my identity, and nothing can take it again." Weeks passed. The news covered the court proceedings, the fallout, and the confirmation of my mother's initial involvement. Arthur was under investigation. Rachel faced professional consequences but showed remorse, and I stayed at the cabin, processing, reflecting, living. The phone rang one morning. Rachel's voice trembled. "Lena, I want to try again, not as part of Dad's games, but as my sister." I listened, letting her words wash over me. There was sincerity, there was fear, and there was the understanding that she had only ever known shadows of truth. "I'll listen," I said finally. "But everything begins with honesty, nothing less." We met later that day. She apologized without excuses, acknowledged her part in the misuse, and promised transparency moving forward. I didn't need grand gestures. I just needed acknowledgement, responsibility, and willingness to change. Days turned into weeks. I walked the trails around the lake, watched the fog rise, and let the solitude heal me. The cabin became a place not just of retreat, but of creation. I journaled, recorded my experiences, and reflected on the lessons learned. Each day was a reclamation of my identity, each breath a reaffirmation of my agency. One evening, sitting by the lake with the fire crackling, I looked at the reflection of the moon on the water. For years, my name had been borrowed, manipulated, and hidden in the service of others. Now it was mine entirely. I wrote one last note, not for evidence, not for someone else, but for myself. Lena McDaniel is here. I exist. I am whole. And I will not be borrowed again. The night deepened, the fire burned low, and the lake shimmered like liquid silver. I felt a sense of completion, a quiet joy. I was no longer a pawn, a signature, or a shadow. I was me. And for the first time, I smiled freely, knowing the story belonged entirely to me and no one could claim it otherwise. The wind moved through the pines. The water lapped gently against the rocks, and in that quiet symphony, I found my freedom.